Hello and welcome to Policy Watch. Let's take a quick look at this week's top headlines. Invest surplus money or pay special dividends, says the Prime Minister to cash-rich PSUs. Parliamentary panel all set to submit report on the National Food Security Bill in the forthcoming winter session of Parliament. In another step towards fiscal consolidation, a Finance Ministry proposal seeks to cut budget allocations for key ministries. And some relief for consumers as Delhi Electricity Regulatory Commission lowers its power tariffs. Those were the headlines this week, and joining me on Policy Watch this week will be Jayanta Chowdhury, Senior Editor Business at the Telegraph. It's your first time on Policy Watch, Jayanta. Welcome to the show. Let's get started right away.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, along with Heavy Industries Minister Praful Patel and Finance Minister P. Chidambaram, met the heads of top government-owned firms this week. While the PSU chiefs expressed their concerns regarding delays in the clearances of major projects, the government had its own share of concerns as Prime Minister Manmohan Singh asked the cash-rich PSUs to invest surplus funds to reignite economic growth. Here's the story. Take a look.
Prime Minister Manmohan Singh met heads of major PSUs to allay their concerns regarding delays in clearance of major projects. The Prime Minister has also decided to set up a high-power committee to look into some major issues of PSUs like autonomy and regulatory clearances, beside investment of surplus funds.
They have issues, especially in terms of their autonomy and their ability to be investing in India and also into global assets internationally. And the Prime Minister and all of us have understood their issues, and we will work with them even more closely to see that they are able to overcome these difficulties.
The meeting, which comes in the wake of the government finding it hard to meet the fiscal deficit target of 5.1% of the GDP for the current fiscal, saw the Prime Minister carrying a stern message for the cash-rich PSUs. The Prime Minister asked the PSUs to either invest their surplus cash of over rupees 2.5 lakh crore or pay it back as a special dividend to the exchequer.
And I do fully endorse that either you use that money for your growth and development or in a time-bound manner, rather than just sitting on that money, it may be at least given to the government by way of a special dividend.
On the sidelines of the meeting, the Prime Minister also said that the country should achieve a growth level of 8 to 8.5% regardless of what happens in the world economy. The important issue of divestment was also broadly discussed in the meeting, but no specific decision was taken in that regard. So far, the government has lined up 11 companies for divestment to mobilize at least rupees 30,000 crore. However, even after almost 7 months of this fiscal, the government has still not opened its account. With Athar Khan, Rahul Kapoor, RSTV.
There you go. Jayanta, the central PSUs have been sitting on stockpiles of cash for a while now. Are you surprised that it took the Prime Minister so long to issue a stern warning saying, look, either invest in your growth or pay us a special dividend?
No, I'm not surprised, really, frankly speaking, because this money has been there with them for quite some time, about 2 lakh crores or so. It keeps varying a little here and there. But that's the basic amount which they have kept for about the last 3-4 years. All of them have long-term plans, which is why nobody was really disturbing them that why haven't you given us a special dividend or why haven't you invested the money as yet? The problem is that the investment plans that they had have been held up for some time. Because of various, we have reduced our license large to the bare minimum. But what we have brought in its place is a kind of clearances large. You need a number of clearances, environment clearance, water clearance, this, building clearance in order to set up a new factory, set up a new coal field, whatever you want to do. Now, these clearances have not been forthcoming for these PSUs, A. B, the timing for investment has at times not been that great. If you're in the downturn of a steel cycle, then you don't want to invest in a new steel factory. Or if you're in the upturn of a coal mine factory, that is when you want to actually invest in a coal field.
Right.
So these things they have been calculating and they have been waiting and watching. Now the Prime Minister is saying that, look, my economy is not doing all that well. Nobody in the private sector wants to invest or they don't have the money to invest.
Right.
So why don't you guys get down and do the job for me?
Right. So sort of bail me out because other projects are not really working out. Like India Inc. is not doing great.
Absolutely. So two things. We keep talking about PSUs being reduced, the number of government PSUs being reduced. But if you didn't have these PSUs, you wouldn't have had someone to bail you out at this stage.
Right, but coming back to the point of invest in your own growth, like the PM said. Now, cash-rich PSUs, like say for example ONGC or Coal India for that matter, they have enough stockpiles of cash, like you just mentioned. And you also mentioned that there are long-term plans for investing. What are those long-term plans for investing? I mean, if they don't invest now, when do they plan to invest?
Well, they want to invest. Coal India, for instance, it wants to set up 100 new mines. All of them are stuck at various stages of clearances. So you can't set up a mine, you can't really start mining till you get all those clearances, so they are stuck with the cash. They want to invest, but they are unable to do it. Let's take ONGC. ONGC through ONGC Videsh has been wanting to buy a number of oil fields. You don't always get to buy the oil field you want to buy because someone else also wants to buy it. A. B. It might not be the oil field you want to buy. You are being pressurized into buying something which might be a dud field.
Which you don't really want.
Which you really don't want. So you are going to be chary about investing. You're going to wait and watch. You're going to look into every single asset and then decide. And you don't want to invest at a high cost.
Absolutely.
You don't want to be Tata's investing in JLR at a huge cost.
Absolutely. Also, you mentioned that clearance issues have been important to PSUs. They have been getting stuck because of a tussle between ministries, for example. Environment clearance, you mentioned, was a very big thing. There is another issue that has been in the pipeline, has been plaguing these PSUs for a while now. I remember when the late Vilasrao Deshmukh was the heavy industries minister, I had asked him about the issue of independent directors to be appointed to Maharatnas and Navratnas, and they weren't being appointed. And he had said at that time that, look, we're doing it. It's in a time-bound manner. It'll come. It's in the pipeline. Then Praful Patel became the heavy industries minister, and he's been parroting the same line since he became the heavy industries minister. He's saying that we are looking into it. It'll happen. But this is a big issue. Why aren't independent directors being appointed and then nominated for Maharatnas and Navratnas?
Well, there are two things. One, of course, you need a large number of independent directors because you have a huge number of PSUs. And all the boards have to be expanded. So that means a large pool of talent, and you don't want all of them to be retired civil servants. You want some of them to be retired lawyers, chartered accountants, economists, businessmen, journalists for that matter. Why not? All these people you need, but it's a large talent pool which you need to first A, check out, and list out, and B, then promote them. Now, it takes some time in doing so. And obviously, there are pulls and pressures in any political system, whether it's the Congress ruling the center or the BJP or whichever United Front government, whatever you want, there would be pulls and pressures, and they are obviously jockeying for those pulls and pressures and trying to see to it that you can actually get an independent board onto these PSUs, which will not disrupt the functioning of the PSUs. Mind you, directors you need. But you need them to be directors who will actually contribute to the PSU and not be a burden on the PSU.
Absolutely. It can't be a figurehead or a rubber stamp over
Absolutely.
there. Also, you mentioned, of course, clearances. I want to go back to that again and again because the NIB, the National Investment Board, is one such step that the Prime Minister is contemplating right now, along with P. Chidambaram as well. Also, a cabinet level, secretary level committee is being set up under Ajit Seth that will look into clearance problems as well as other regulatory problems as well. Now, Ajit Seth is a very experienced campaigner. He has been cabinet secretary as well. And do you think that, in fact, is the right way to go about appointing a committee to look into this? Do you think that is going to be effective at all?
I don't know why the Prime Minister has been dithering on this for such a long time. It's been 2 years. Let's take the case of environmental clearances for coal mines alone. There was a policy which someone framed, go, no go, some areas are not to be mined at all. And then there was a huge tussle over that issue. A group of ministers was set up. It took a year to decide which areas to be demarcated as go and no go. Obviously, these are issues which should have been cleared out much, much faster. The Prime Minister has actually been deficient in that respect in stepping in and saying, here, guys, stop fighting. This is what I have decided.
Right.
He is the Prime Minister. All the ministers can have their little spats, interministerial spat, but it is the Prime Minister who has to decide. And he should have done that long back. Right now, yes, NIB is a good idea since you haven't been able to get these through the normal routine of CCEA or Cabinet. Okay, form an NIB. But there was no need really for an NIB. You could have gone through the system as it is and taken these decisions long back.
Jayanta, two quick questions before we move on to the next story. First, number one, the PM also has said to the PSUs as well that if there is no demand forthcoming from foreign shores, ignite demand, domestic demand. How are they going to do that? Quick question.
Well, well, this is one, this is a chicken egg story. Do you wait for the chicken to come out and then you start laying eggs again, or do you wait for the egg to hatch? So that's what is happening to the PSUs. The market is in doldrums, obviously. So do you go in at this stage, or do you wait for the market to improve? So if you go in at this stage and the issue doesn't do all that well, people are going to say the government forced the PSU into the market and didn't really get much money.
It was bad timing. It should have been done.
Absolutely.
And if they do, in fact, do well, then of course they'll take all the credit. I think you've answered that question. My last question on this story particularly. Divestment was also discussed during that meeting with the Prime Minister, and the Finance Minister was also present. 30,000 crore is the divestment target this year. Some people say it's highly ambitious. I tend to agree with them, especially given the fact that there are no big ticket issues this year. There's no CIL this year. There's no ONGC this year. Do you think 30,000 crores is a viable target?
I think it can be done. It's not impossible. And the market is slowly looking up, if you notice. The US job data has improved, which means there will be more funds moving into India and other developing markets for that matter. And the retail market has kind of expanded. Despite the gloom and doom picture, it seems more people are actually coming in. And if you do allow mutual funds a little more leeway, do allow pension funds a little more leeway in the market, then I think there is a possibility that your issues might actually succeed.
Even if they're not big ticket.
Even if they're not big ticket. And remember, banks are flush with funds. They don't have too many people to lend to right now because most of the private sector is holding on to its investment buttons.
Right, and I think that's already on its way. P. Chidambaram has big plans for pension funds as well as the insurance fund. We'll have to wait and watch.
We'll have to wait
to see if that happens or not. We'll take a small break right now. We'll come back with our second story of the week. Don't go anywhere. More with Jayanta Chowdhury after this break. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Now, the parliamentary panel examining the National Food Security Bill that aims to provide legal rights to cheaper food grains to about 63.5% of the country's population is looking forward to submit its report during the forthcoming winter session of Parliament. The food bill has the backing of UPA chairperson Sonia Gandhi and was also a part of the promises made during the 2009 general elections. Recently, Food Minister K.V. Thomas also has said that the proposed food bill will be introduced in the winter session of Parliament. Now, Jayanta, the panel's report, this particular panel, its term expired a while ago. It was reconstituted. Do you think there was any real need to reconstitute it and get another panel report in, because there is wide-scale divergence on the food security bill among political parties, among civil society, what have you. Or even though it has the backing of the UPA chairperson, do you think that this panel report that is supposed to be submitted in the winter session of Parliament will have any effect in getting a consensus on the food security?
I don't think there'll be any effect, much of an effect on getting a consensus. Let's get it clear. After NREGA, this is going to be the one big ticket move by the UPA to garner votes. Right. And it's going to succeed probably if it really kicks in early. Now, obviously, none of the parties which are basically opposed to the Congress coming back to power would like it to come through. None of them. None of them can actually say no, but none of them would like it to happen, which means, let's say Manmohan Singh Yadav, who's going to fight the Congress in the UP bitterly in the next elections, whatever he might be supporting them right now in Parliament, he will fight them. He wouldn't like the Congress to walk away with the kudos. So he's going to oppose it. He's going to demand much more concessions than is available right now in the food bill. Right. And the Congress is saying, hey guys, let's get the bill through. Let us give somebody something. After that, we can go and expand if we have the money. Right now, we don't have too much money. So let us go and give some poor people some amount of grain security. That's what they're talking about. Let's see how it pans out. I would imagine that the Congress will try its level best, use every single weapon that it has in its armory to push this bill through in this winter session so that it has at least one full year of food security actually functioning on the ground.
And that would translate into millions and millions of votes.
That should, because NREGA is something which people will slowly and silently stop worrying about or wondering about.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned Mulayam Singh and others as well, because Akhilesh Yadav, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh right now, he is opposing the bill now, saying that he wants modifications in the bill. He says that 33% being excluded from the ambit of the bill is not fair in a state like Uttar Pradesh, where poverty is really high. He wants 95% coverage in urban areas and 100% coverage in rural areas. Is that, first of all, is that feasible?
It's difficult at this stage. I'm not saying anything is impossible. Nothing is impossible, really. But at this stage, given the logistics of the situation, the government doesn't even have enough granaries to keep food green. You really cannot assure 95% coverage in rural areas, 100% coverage in urban areas. A. B. The money involved. It's huge cash amounts are needed to buy up the grain, to keep the grain, and then to distribute it. It's a lot of money.
And lots of questions also raised on the PDS system. Our PDS system has come in for a lot of criticism as well.
Obviously, it's come in for a flack ever since it was started.
Right.
There have been leakages right, left, and center. We have cases of rotting food grains. The granaries are not really well built. You don't even have sufficient amount of granaries. Mr. Subramaniam has been talking about granaries, building a chain of granaries throughout the country for the last 10 years. He's been crying himself hoarse. There have been some amount of money kept in every budget, but nothing really big has really come about.
So the divergence in political parties, even their own allies now, the SP is starting to make noise now. Do you think that will, in fact, make the passage of the bill even more difficult? I imagine it would.
It would, but nobody, frankly, I don't think anybody would have the guts to say, no, I don't want the bill. Everybody will say, I want the bill, but I want these changes. And what will eventually happen is, you will have a vote. You will say that, okay guys, we are going ahead with a vote. We will incorporate the changes you have suggested in future. But right at this time, do you want this bill or not? Do you want people to stay hungry, or do you want people to be fed?
The food security bill, Jayanta, has come in for criticism mainly from, say, fiscal hawks, because it will put immense amounts of pressure on the government coffers. The government is still struggling with the fisc right now. If in the case that this bill goes through, I think the government will be overburdened by controlling the fiscal deficit. They'll have to find other ways, because the food subsidy will shoot up like anything. And they'll have to find other ways to control the deficit. What other ways are they going to find? They're struggling right now, aren't they?
Absolutely, you're right about it, which is why the Athar card has been brought in, or whatever other cards you're bringing in. You want to target your subsidies. You want to see to it that it really reaches those whom you intended to. And if you do target the subsidies, then there'll be some cuts in subsidies, fertilizer subsidy, oil subsidy, and even the food subsidy for that matter, will not be as big as it would have been if you didn't have that means of targeting the subsidy.
Right.
That's one, obviously. Secondly, it is going to be a burden on the fiscal consolidation. You are probably not going to be able to do what you wanted to do, 5.3% of the GDP this year, and then cut it down further. Probably it will blow it up further, unless and until you can find ways of increasing your revenues, which will be difficult, but not impossible, perhaps.
Right.
Secondly, the big other thing, the plus point that you have to see is, this is the big spending drive in the economy. You have been, in Keynesian terms, you need to inject funds into the economy if you want the economy to grow. And this is one big way. You give people money into the hands, or food into the hands, so that they have disposable income with which they buy more things.
Right.
So rural consumption actually goes up. It has been going up, if you remember, for the last 10 years, considerably. And this will give a bigger impetus to it.
Absolutely.
That is what you are hoping for, that this will drive the economy forward. You want to grow at a rates of 8 to 8.5%. This actually might, if you can control the situation, it might be a secret weapon.
We'll have to wait and watch the winter session of Parliament very carefully, whether or not this comes in or not. We'll take another small break right now. We'll come back after the break. Policy Watch returns on the other side of this break. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Staying on the Finance Ministry now. The Finance Ministry has started a closer scrutiny of expenditure by government departments. North Block has assessed that only a handful of government departments have spent in line with the funds allocated to them. Other departments which have not utilized their funds may face a reduction in their budget allocation. Some ministries, as a result, have already started withdrawing funds hastily to avoid a cut in their budget estimate. The Finance Ministry has time and again voiced the importance of achieving fiscal consolidation and cutting down expenditure of government departments. This is yet another step in that direction. Policy Watch spoke to Rohit Vishwanath. Take a look.
In a step to achieve fiscal consolidation, Finance Ministry has started a closer scrutiny of expenditures by government departments. And to talk more on this, I have with me Mr. Rohit Vishwanath, who is an economist. Welcome to Policy Watch, sir. North Block has assessed that only a handful of government departments have been spending in line with the funds allocated to them. Other departments which are not utilizing their money face the risk of cut in their budget allotments. So how do you see important ministries reacting to that?
Well, that's right. As per what one hears, only ministries like aviation, railways, and and education, I think, have been spending in line with the budget plans. And other ministries like petroleum and corporate affairs hadn't even started to spend until August. So, the finance ministry would obviously be reviewing their expenditures, and even ministries, I'm told, like the rural development ministry and the health ministry would be kind of their expenses would also be reviewed.
To avoid a cut in the budget estimates, Ministry have hastily started withdrawing funds now, and there are other departments which tend to withdraw funds only in the second half of the year. How do you see the Finance Ministry dealing with that?
Well, the Finance Ministry has kind of adopted a kind of a new strategy, in the sense that unlike earlier when they used to review the expenditures only once a year, now they're keeping a close tab at the expenditures by the individual ministries. And I hear that the finance minister himself has kind of met the economic advisors, the financial advisors of individual ministries, and told them personally that wasteful expenditures would not be tolerated. So these are the steps that the finance ministry is taking.
Finance Ministry has voiced its opinion time and again about the importance of fiscal consolidation. What do you see are the other important measures which the government can take to rein in the ballooning fiscal deficit?
Well, the government has said that there is a considerable amount of savings from the various social sector schemes, and that since the administrative ministries have not been able to spend so much. And also, there were a lot of austerity measures that were introduced earlier this year, including a kind of a target of nearly 10% savings on planned expenditure. And also, the ministry had come out with recommendations saying that unwanted expenditures should be cut down by the ministries, including travel abroad and cutting down in the number of posts. So, but I personally feel that these are kind of merely cosmetic announcements to kind of send out signals. What would matter would be the kind of things that the ministry has said it would be doing, including reversing whatever has been allocated to the ministries.
So just one last question. Do you see the government being able to keep its fiscal deficit to 5.1% as estimated in the budget in the year 2012-13?
I am personally skeptical about that, because the subsidies themselves would be exceeding the targeted 1.9% of GDP. So, I don't know. Perhaps maybe this present move to kind of take back whatever has been allocated under the plan would help the ministry to kind of reach somewhere close to the target.
Thank you so much, sir, for talking to Policy Watch. So we heard our expert there who's positive, and he says that Finance Ministry has taken a positive step and it will help to rein in the ballooning fiscal deficit. That's all I have for now. Back to in the studio.
Rahul Kapoor with their story. Now, I must thank my guest before I sign off. Jayanta Chowdhury, thank you so much for joining us on Policy Watch this week. Your comments were invaluable.
Thank you.
Our first story this week on Policy Watch was the Prime Minister's meet with the PSU chiefs. Now, cash-rich PSUs have been told by the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister, of course, that they must invest in their own growth. Long-term investment, of course, has to be set away for that matter. The Prime Minister and the government needs help from cash-rich PSUs. We perhaps could see very soon some steps taken that the PSUs will take to invest in their own growth and their regrowth, as the Prime Minister put it. Of course, that one thing is still there, that they don't want to go in the wrong time and perhaps fail and get all the blame on them. That's something they have to be careful about. Our second story this week on Policy Watch was the Parliamentary Panel on Food Security Bill. They will present their paper and the report in the winter session of Parliament. My guest, Jayanta Chowdhury, seems to think that perhaps they might not really succeed in converging all the views towards the passage of a food security bill. But of course, remember one key important thing, the UPA chairperson has complete support of the UPA chairperson for this particular bill, and of course the government will have to balance the passage of this bill and of course the ballooning fiscal deficit target that they have right now. But yes, it is a very important step for any government in power. It will translate into votes if it is implemented and passed like the way the government wants it to be passed. But we'll of course have to wait and see till the winter session of Parliament about the fate of that particular bill. That's all the time we have on Policy Watch this week. Athar saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.